Ibiza.
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 Blackpool. Ibiza.
Hello, this is the Bureau of Lost Culture, and this is Stephen. Now, put on your gladerags and your dancing shoes. We're off clubbing. Here at the Bureau, we've often traced the way that the underground has become the mainstream, how the counterculture has become corporate, and how that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Mainstream culture needs to be refreshed. The counterculture needs something to creatively resist, to kick against, to disrupt. And this is perhaps nowhere more evident than when it comes to dance music and club culture, and geographically speaking, when it comes to the island of Ibiza, with its heady concoction of sunshine, drugs, beats and love. The island's metamorphosis from arty countercultural haven to commercial mass market party hub is the subject of this episode. It's a subject that's been very well documented by my guests today in both words and images. Alex Petridis, chief music writer for The Guardian, has been writing about music and culture for a very long time, contributing to magazines like The Face and Select during the 1990s. He wrote about emerging music trends and the shifting landscape of British youth culture, fashion, Britpop, rave and club culture. And, as we'll hear, he wasn't lurking on the edge of the dance floor, but enthusiastically throwing shapes with the rest of them in the sweaty melee. Oh yes. He is also the former features editor at Mixmag, the clubber's Bible, where he met our other guest, photographer Dean Chalkley, one of the UK's leading documentarians of British subculture and a revered music photographer. His work with the likes of Oasis, Idris Elba and Amy Winehouse is widely celebrated. And at the tail end of the 90s, Dean found himself in Ibiza too, working for Mixmag, and he jumped right into the middle of it all, but managed to keep his camera steady and amassed an incredible archive of images. And his latest book, just about to land, is Back in Ibiza 1998 to 2003, a thrilling deep dive through those images, illustrating an unfiltered and sometimes unhinged club scene from a world before Snapchat and TikTok. A quick thanks to my recent correspondents Marty, Frank, Judy and Adam. Join us at www.bureauoflostculture.com. But for now, let's set sail for the beautiful Balearic island of Ibiza. I'm very pleased I've got two of them here, two old, I won't say old timers, but old buddies actually, cross paths back in the day. Dean Chalkley, the author of this amazingly beautiful new book, Back in Ibiza, 1998 to 2003, photographer, and Alexis Petridis, chief music writer for The Guardian. Hello Alexis.
Hello.
I'm not going to ask you guys to demonstrate your dance moves.
You don't want to see that.
I heard you two chatting out there. You actually crossed paths at Mixmag, didn't you, both of you?
I started at Mixmag in 1995. I went on work experience and ended up, I stayed there for, I think, 3.5 years. I ended up deputy editor. And you were a photographer.
I kind of started work there about 97, I think it was, around that sort of time, because I'd made the acquaintance of a woman called Paola Cimino over in at Dazed and Confused magazine. She was working there, and and then she got a job at Mixmag and asked if I'd like to do something there. And at that time, it was the editor, the late great Dom Phillips. Yeah.
What happened to Dom?
He was murdered.
Ooh.
Dom, after he left Mixmag, became like a proper journalist. He became a serious journalist. He moved to Brazil and was writing about politics in Brazil for New York Times and for The Guardian and all sorts of people. And he started writing a book about the threat to the rainforest. And there was a big news story a couple of years ago where a British journalist and this other guy who was a rainforest activist were murdered in the Amazon. That was
him.
That was Dom.
Yeah.
Ouch. It was nuts. It was really mad. I saw him just before he went away on this trip. He'd come back to England because he wanted to get his COVID shots. He couldn't because of the political situation in Brazil. There was no COVID shots to be had. He said what he was going to do, and I was like, that sounds really dangerous, and it turned out to be incredibly dangerous.
I wonder whether he's got a place in St Bride's on Fleet Street. They've got this altar for journalists who sort of died in the field. Have you ever seen it? Very touching. Yeah.
I was in the Guardian offices the other week, and there's a sort of photo of him up there along with a couple of other Guardian journalists. One of the journalists, I think, was murdered in Iran or something like that. Yeah, it was quite mad what happened to Dom.
Yeah, well, listen, let's light a candle for Dom, and his memory lives on. Yeah. Partly in these stories. Alexis, you just talked a little bit about what you've done at the Guardian. It's also ChatGPT says that you're renowned for your sharp, witty prose. You're smart, irreverent, and deeply plugged into the zeitgeist.
Yeah,
so we're expecting a lot from you in the next.
I endlessly inputted data into ChatGPT. So it would say that about me.
Couldn't find anything about you, Dean.
No, I'm an enigma.
What I thought I'd start off with asking you, both of you, is your first experience of Ibiza, Alexis. Going to Ibiza to club.
Yeah, that was the first time I went. I think it was either 95 or 96. I went. So Ibiza was really in like full sort of swing by then. It had turned into a kind of major holiday destination. That was the era when Manumission was like the big club in Ibiza.
Did you go to club or did you go to right, or a bit of both?
I went to club, tried to do a bit of both. It was supremely hedonistic.
As in personally, or just your...
I think generally and personally culminated with me locking myself in the bedroom of my apartment and refusing to come out because I just couldn't really take any more. There was one evening that began at Manumission. It ended with being involved in a police chase, and after that I thought I just would like to go back to England.
I think that's quite dramatic for a first time.
Yeah. It was really full on.
Well, people often talk about it being life changing, but I mean
there was a certain sense of there being a license to behave in a certain way that you would perhaps think twice about behaving like in England, Yeah, that was my first time to be there. I went back a year later and it wasn't anywhere near as hectic, and I've been back since.
Yeah, and you've written about it a lot, haven't you? The sort of evolution of Ibiza. Yeah. I'm going to come back to that. But Dean, what about you? I mean, I know that your story a little bit because, of course, you were sent by Mixmag, weren't you, too?
Yeah.
With the camera in hand.
When I met Alexis at Mixmag, then Dom left. A new editor called Neil Stevenson arrived. Paola was the picture editor. What they wanted to do is introduce new elements into the whether it's photography or writing. I'd done some shoots for Mixmag. They asked if I'd like to go to Ibiza, and at that moment I was thinking I would have wanted to go there in '88 actually, but is it going to be any good?
Of your backstory, because you were like a legal raver, weren't you? At Essex and doing all that stuff. So.
Here's the thing, right? I'm a kind of a cumulative person, and so I DJ and stuff at the moment, but that's more like Northern Soul and stuff that's remained with me forever. But as time went on through the '80s, I was into soul music, rare groove. Got into acid house, and so before you know it, I found myself in the middle of a field or in a car driving in a whole caterpillar of cars going to find an illegal rave, and then we turn up at sunrise, a massive rave in a hangar. It could be all manner of different places. So, but it felt like a natural progression in that way. But fast forward 10 more years, and when Paola said, do you want to go to Ibiza? I was like, yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what it's like now, kind of thing, but is it going to be any good?
We're going to come back to what it was like, actually, because of course your book is about that, I mean, and the images. But one thing I noticed reading about it was that at the time, which I guess, Alexis, would have been very true when you were there, was that people didn't have mobile phones with cameras, so therefore you weren't getting this flood of images, right, of what it's like to go to these places. And in fact, I think it says in there that previous to that, club shots had either been quite boring because they were either with flash, so everybody looks like white and sweaty, or you couldn't see anything, everything's blurred.
Yeah,
right? So you sort of broke the mould a bit, didn't you?
There was a kind of prevailing style, if you like, sort of flash and blur. I took a bit of a risk going out there, so I wanted to push it a little bit, and I took a particular camera, which actually I brought along today. So it's a Fuji GA645 WI. It's a medium format camera. It's got fixed lens. That actually kind of led to how close I got with a lot of the shots and things.
A lot
like
of these
that.
are quite intimate, aren't they?
Yeah,
quite right up close.
Yeah, because it's got a wide angle lens. Going back to Mixmag, I think their saying was like by clubbers, for clubbers.
Yeah. Is that right?
That's kind of important.
Because you know what it is that you're actually recording or writing about.
You're the audience.
You're the audience, right? It's not like some eagle sort of floating above, observing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like an anthropologist.
Exactly. I went there with a writer that we both know. Well, we won't say who he is.
It went off the rails.
Put it this way.
It says that Alexis went off the rails a bit. It's like,
These writers, man. You know.
Common story, isn't it?
it's like Hunter S. Thompson's.
Literally, we went there. Then the next night, I think it was, we went to Manumission, and at the end of that night, I saw the writer, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm just going to go off with this lot from trade. I'm going back to the villa." Yeah, and that's actually the last time I ever saw him. I know he's alive. He had a really good time, and I think he was really living his best life.
Did he hand in his copy?
There was no copy really. So this is the point. This is the point. When I woke up in the morning and you weren't there, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And decided to go to the payphone and phone up the magazine and say, writer's not about, what do you want me to do? And so they said, look, just, if you're happy to, just carry on, get what you can and come back and show us what you've got. No brief. Yeah, what I did is I carried on, came back, went into the office, and they were like, oh, wow, okay. And so they pushed aside a lot of what was going to be the organised features for that issue, and it occupied most of 30 pages, I think. But the writing consisted of just little captions that they would often do.
The photographs tell the story, don't they? Really,
exactly.
In a way. Yeah.
Well,
so we're going to come back to that. But Alexis, the island of Ibiza has long carried a reputation for freedom, hedonism, and transformation. Over the past 60 years, it's evolved from a sleepy Balearic outpost with a hippie heart into the global epicentre of commercial electronic dance music. You've documented that, haven't you? It's quite interesting, isn't it? Almost like psychogeographically, the sort of story of Ibiza.
It seems to sort of take off as a sort of, in inverted commas, countercultural hub in the 1930s, in the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War. It was quite sort of cut off, it feels like, from mainland Spain. So Franco basically kind of left it alone, with the net result that a lot of people went there to escape. People from the Spanish Civil War went there. Subsequently, people trying to get away from what was happening in Germany went there. So you ended up with this kind of sort of peculiar mix of kind of intellectuals. Albert Camus was there for a bit. Walter Benjamin was there for a bit. It just had this sense that you'd be left alone. It's also quite cheap to live there. It's not developed in the way, obviously, that it's developed now. Lots of artists go there because it's cheap to live there. There's a hotel, I think, called El Corsorino, which is also an art gallery. Quite grand hotel that Errol Flynn goes and stays at. But it also hosts this sort of group of abstract painters and sculptors who call themselves Grupo Ibiza 59. In the 1960s, you get this sort of kind of duality where you get people like Denholm Elliott and Terry Thomas move there. Nico lives there for a bit after she stars in La Dolce Vita. There's also this establishment called the Domino Bar, which is a bit like a sort of, I guess, Ibizan version of the Colony Rooms in Soho, with a bit of more kind of beatnik sort of attitude stirred in. Lots of jazz is played. A sort of druggy kind of culture starts to take hold. People are taking LSD. It's so pronounced, the sort of druggy side of Ibiza. I think in 1966 there's an exploitation film made called Hallucination Generation, and it's set in Ibiza. And it's, you're invited to a pill party or something like that.
That was the exploitation film. That's great.
Yeah, as the 60s go on, people sort of trying to get out of France after the events of sort of Paris 1968. A lot of draft dodgers start turning up there.
Avoiding the Vietnam War. Right, okay.
A couple of charities in Scandinavia would get people out of America. It then becomes a kind of stopping off point on the hippie trail. If you're en route to wherever, I don't know, Marrakesh, or
get acclimatised a little bit. Under the Franco regime, things were very tough in Spain, but it was kind of, so it was this like a place to escape to, even for Spaniards, and then became this kind of haven for some ne'er-do-wells, some kind of countercultural folk, people
definitely
run away from things.
It was also, there was a right-wing French nationalist terrorist group based there who were plotting to assassinate de Gaulle. So not everybody that was hanging out in Ibiza was all peace and love, but it was definitely this. It's a weird, I grant you, it is a weird thing to have this sort of artist, sort of bohemian colony in what is essentially a fascist dictatorship. It's a really strange thing, but this is how it seemed to pan
I mean,
out.
do you think sometimes in these places they almost need like a sort of a place where they can kind of the freaks, as they would say, can go and then keep an eye on them? It's like they're all there.
Maybe, yeah. They're not doing any harm over there. They're not disrupting things in whatever, Madrid or Barcelona or whatever.
Quite a few gay people went there as well, fleeing the sort of Franco regime.
That was definitely part of it. And then because of the sort of, I guess, the sense of it being a stopping off point on the hippie trail, it does start to kind of sort of influence things like rock music. More, the Barbet Schroeder film, the Pink Floyd soundtrack is filmed on Ibiza. And the Can album, Tego Mego, is named after an island, a small island off the coast of Ibiza, where it is alleged that Aleister Crowley used to hang out and practice magic or whatever it was that Aleister Crowley got up to. The fact of the matter is that nobody's got any evidence that Crowley was ever there, but that's why the Can album Tego Mego is called Tego Mego.
Sid Barrett was taken there to, by Sam Huck, Hank Wangford to save him after his freak out, and it didn't really work
very well. No, I think the one problem was that when he got there, poor old Sid refused to put any sun cream on at all, and so ended up just sort of covered in blisters and But if you want the other side of it and the kind of calm, tranquil, bohemian side of it, he's also alleged to have written Wined and Dined, second solo album, Barrett's beautiful song. He's alleged to have written that there. A lot of this stuff sort of bound up in a kind of myth.
The myth of Ibiza, right?
Yeah.
And funny enough, I was in Dea in Mallorca a couple of summers ago, and of course Robert Graves was based there.
And Soft Machine went
Soft
there.
Machine with this legacy of stuff.
This is the real yin and yang of it, because there are sort of film stars and rock stars and things like that start to go there. People start opening nightclubs in the late 60s. Also, another thing that happens where there's this mysterious Frenchman called Anant, and he in the early 70s gets hold of a sort of sound system and starts organising these happenings. Where you end up in caves or up in the hills and everybody's naked and so on and so forth. And I think the clubs in Ibiza are sort of influenced in equal part by that sort of duality. One, they're quite glamorous, and on the other hand there is something bohemian, countercultural undercurrent to what's going on there.
So you've always got those two things, glamour and then the kind of slight underground culture twisting together.
And I think the underground culture, because of what happens in there in 1987 and what happens subsequently, is harder to find now, but they still have they call them hippie markets, and these are the sort of legacy of people like draft dodgers and stuff like that who would go there, or people stopping off on the trail to Marrakesh or whatever, who would support themselves while they were living there by selling crafts. The other thing that happens in the 70s and 80s, it becomes a proper package tour holiday destination, Ibiza, as well.
Yeah. Flights get cheaper, people can go on holiday,
it's a Club 1830 place. San Antonio, even in the 90s when I went there, San Antonio was pretty leery. It was kind of gangs of lads out on the piss,
Let's roll forward to 87. So what happens?
What happens in 87? A promoter / DJ in London called Nicky Holloway, sort of tangentially linked to what's called the Soul Mafia, a group of DJs and promoters that sort of basically control the modern soul scene in the southeast of England. Nicky Holloway starts a club called Special Branch in South London, where he entices Pete Tong to DJ for him. Giles Peterson does a jazz room. They start playing a more eclectic mix of music. Nicky Holloway has also got this thing going on where he rings up clubs in Ibiza and goes, if you let my DJs play, I'll guarantee you X number of people to come in. He turns up mob-handed, organises a load of his mates to come over from England to Ibiza when they go to these clubs. And then in 1987, Nicky Holloway goes out there with Paul Oakenfold, Danny Rampling and Johnny Walker. There are English people out there that they know, and when they get to Ibiza, these people are different than they were in London. They've all become incredibly skinny, and they're all, sort of talking like hippies, and they're all talking about this kind of music that they're calling Balearic beat. The music played by a DJ called Alfredo, who plays at one of the clubs, Amnesia. The reason they're all skinny and talking like hippies is that ecstasy has arrived in Ibiza. This group of DJs go to Amnesia and take ecstasy for the first time, and what Alfredo is playing is this absolutely bizarre mix. So he'll play house music, tracks by The Residents. He'll play things that are incredibly naff in British terms, Stock Aitken Waterman tracks. He'll play The Whole of the Moon by the Waterboys. Bits of soundtracks and so on and so forth. The $6 million question is, had these four guys not taken ecstasy, would they have gone, this mix of music is absolutely the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life, or would they go,
This is
why the
terrible.
hell are you playing a Rick Astley record?
Right,
You know what I
right,
mean?
yeah.
They have this
Epiphany, right?
epiphanal experience that is so pronounced that when they come back to England, they decide they need to recreate this experience they've had in Amnesia. And 3 of the 4 of them start clubs. Paul Oakenfold organises what he calls an Ibiza reunion, where he recreates the beautiful Balearic vibe in a club in Streatham called Ziggy's that had Nosha Powell on the door, you know, the legendary sort of London hard man. So, but someone has procured a supply of ecstasy, so it works. Danny Rampling starts Shum, you know, probably most famous of them. Oakenfold then goes on to start another club, Spectrum, which is at Heaven, the gay club. Which in April or May 1988, Nicky Holloway starts Trip, and that's at the Astoria. So you can sort of see already an exponential growth. Trip is the club that really takes it kind of overground because it's on Charing Cross Road. There are these sort of incidents where the club closes and people spill out onto the streets and start dancing on cars.
Because they're all lead up.
They're all lead up, basically. You know, it's like letting a genie out of the bottle. At that point, 1986, 87, pop culture in Britain is quite boring. And people want something new. What also causes the genie to come out of the bottle is that the tabloid press take an interest. You write a lot of kind of shock horror stories, you know, sort of sex, drugs, cult, threat to our children. It has completely the opposite effect to the one intended.
Always does.
It always does. You know, you see a picture of these sort of saucer-eyed people clearly having
Any
a night
young
of-
person's going to read that and think, I'm in.
Yeah, I'd like a bit of that, please, you know. And that leads us into you know, what's sort of known in Britain as the second summer of love in 1988, where you start having these huge orbital raves, you know, around the M25. The impact on Ibiza is that people start going back to Ibiza and exporting what's happened in England back to Ibiza.
It's quite interesting, that, isn't it? Yeah. This kind of feedback loop.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop, but it sort of changes because the music becomes increasingly oriented towards house music. There's just a massive influx of records coming out of Chicago and then Detroit.
Kids here getting turned onto it. They're getting turned onto ecstasy. Thatcher times still, so it's quite dark times in the
Really
UK.
bleak times.
And then you've got this kind of magical garden that you can go to and play in summer.
You know, there's 2 responses to something like Thatcherism, or to dark times generally, isn't there? You can either be Billy Bragg or The Clash or whatever, or you can turn off your mind, relax and flow downstream. And there is something that's quite sort of Thatcherite about the rave scene in a weird way, in that it's very self-starting.
Some rascals running it, a lot of it, right?
Yeah, terrible. I mean, you know, I think nightlife, drugs, darker people get involved. But because I think pop culture in Britain is waiting for the next thing to happen, it really quickly starts impacting on the charts, on youth culture. If you think about British culture generally, I think acid house has more impact on the fabric of Britain than probably anything since the Beatles. I think it has far more impact on the fabric of Britain than punk does.
Particularly in terms of what happens next and how it grows, right, and what it turns into.
Yeah.
So you've got these kids who discover Ibiza. I don't know if you call it the golden age, but it's the kind of early age, isn't it? Where it's underground, it's kids from all different backgrounds, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's the
absolutely.
thing which is interesting to me about the ecstasy, was that in a more obvious way than anything that had come before, it seemed to sort of unite the classes.
Yeah.
Before that, drugs seemed to be associated largely with particular groups of people, didn't they? But suddenly you've got this drug where you've got scallies, footy fans, posh hippies, and they're all in it together, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they're all loving each other.
Ecstasy creates this kind of, whether you want to call it false or not, sense of empathy. Most important pop cultural scenes, things, whether it's Mersey beat or psychedelia or punk or whatever, come out of a demimonde in which classes tend to mix, you know, on more of an even footing perhaps than they would outside. You know, there's usually, this demimonde will contain working class kids, middle class kids, and some really posh people slumming it. But I think it's more pronounced. It gets a lot of coverage. There's a Channel 4 documentary called A Short Film About Chilling, which comes out in 1990.
Yeah, I'm Connie and I'm a club promoter in Tokyo. And why I'm in Ibiza is because I heard that there were wild and intense clubs in Ibiza. I thought it'd be a good chance to listen to all the DJs at one time. And so I came 18 hours.
I'm from Liverpool. I came over here because I was told it was the place to be if you like a raving.
Before, when Frank was alive, you know, Ibiza was a special place that everybody who didn't agree with the system used to come, you know. If you read the history of Ibiza, the Phoenicians and all this, and you compare what is going on here, what they used to do before was stronger than what is happening now, you know. Everything, the bacchanals and all this in this time, you know.
People come here and they rave like 14 nights in a row. Nobody ever does that in London, you know, or England.
I heard about the clubs from your brother for ages, who's back in '88 when it all started happening. He's just been going on about it for ages, hasn't he? And we finally got here, and it's all true.
See here, you know, it's a mixture of all the people who used to come. You can feel different tribes mixing in the dance floor. Oh, this is a new temple of Ibiza, I think. You know.
Anything goes of a night. You've got to show them it seems like everybody's got to show everybody the true self in the day, and got to be cool about it and mellow out to get ready for the evening, save the energy for the evening, really.
In the day you can mellow out, you can sit by the pool, go to the Cafe Del Mar, sit there, watch the sun go down. Everybody sitting around drinking coffees or whatever. 2 hours later it's like turning a light switch on and the place goes into one.
If you saw that on TV, it looks just absolutely idyllic. I mean, it's this beautiful kind of sun-kissed island with this amazing club life, and you know, you would see why other people would want to get involved in that. And this is something that's broadcast on national television.
That's just going to ramp it up hugely, right?
Absolutely. It's the snowball effect of dance music. I don't think anybody who was involved in it at the early stages had any sense that it was going to take off in the way that it did. It's just absolutely unstoppable. It shifts and mutates, and the sound changes, but throughout it all, two things remain a constant. In the summer you should go to Ibiza, and people going, yeah, well, actually you should have gone to Ibiza 2 years ago because it's crap now. There's always somebody, it doesn't matter, there's probably somebody in 1987, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
And there'll be somebody, oh, you should have been here in 85, you know.
I didn't go, I wasn't there, but I get them sort of reading what you've written about it and looking at Dean's book. It does seem to me that there was a watershed in a way, and maybe it's something to do with internet, maybe it's something to do with mobile phones, but where it was not about fame or celebrity or you know, the VIP room and all that sort of stuff. It was much more communal, a bit underground, a bit overgrown, but actually a kind of collective feeling of all these people mixing up together. And there was no big stars involved at that time, right? That starts to come later, right? The superstar DJs and the huge clubs, right?
Yeah. When I first started going to raves and going to clubs, what I thought was brilliant about it, because I came from a background of like in indie music and had the typical sort of Damascene conversion at a rave in Margate.
Was there any chemicals involved?
Yeah. But I remember thinking, this is amazing because it's like the punk rock dream made reality. Everybody is a star. I didn't know who was DJing. Right. I had no idea who was on. Because everybody's on drugs. There's all these insane things on the dance floor around you. And it's like, God, this is completely upended the sort of traditional star system. When you have a magazine like Mixmag, you've got to put someone on the cover. And also, ultimately, people want stars. You know, it's a lovely idea. Beautiful idea, this kind of completely egalitarian form of entertainment in which nobody's a star and everybody's participating and all that. So it's quite sort of, hippie-ish as well in a way. But I don't think people's minds work like that.
That's interesting.
I think people actually want people to look up to. There's this sort of watershed moment in Mixmag where they put a DJ called Sasha on the front. And they've shot him in a certain way and it's accidental. There's almost like a halo of light around his head. And they write, Sasha, Son of God, ? On the cover.
It's funny you mentioned that because mates of mine who were into that scene, they used to talk about Sasha in these kind of slightly reverential, holy terms. Like he'd done something or he'd got something, tuned into something, which was completely like, transcendental in some way in terms of the music.
I can't remember what club it was that he went back to be the resident for. But the flyer said the restoration of Sasha to the north. The restoration, like as a monarch, you know. That sort of superstar DJ culture, that just becomes more and more pronounced as the 90s progress, and this theme becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, Radio 1 start getting involved in it, start promoting it. Brands start getting involved and start promoting it. It becomes lots and lots and lots of money is being made, and it attracts big business, it attracts major labels, it attracts all this sort of stuff, for better or for worse.
Right. And do you think Mixmag was part of that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, much as we would have liked to think we weren't, because Mixmag, when it initially started, was a completely independent publication. Acid House comes along and Mixmag gets kind of swept up with it and turns into a much, much, much bigger thing. We were selling 100,000 copies a month.
Now, Dean, you're 1998, it's a little bit later, but I'm guessing that's in the sort of transitional phase, is it?
As Alexis said, if you think of Ibiza anyway, it's always a kind of place where things are changing. You know, different people have through time have invaded it, occupied it. Places like Esvedra, people go there, think it's a portal to another dimension, and there's aliens that come along, and
I didn't know that. That's good to know.
Even aliens have been there. You got your kind of 1987, and then 90. Things are really getting going then. But then what happens is in the mid 90s, Mike and Andy McKay, they were doing a club in Manchester, and it got very popular very quickly. So they would do parades around Manchester. They would encourage people to come in. They wanted to do things a bit different. In DJ Magazine, I think they became like the #1 dance club in the UK. Immediately, a lot of people got to hear about it. I think what happened is some people turned up on the door and threatened them, said, give us the door money.
Oh, some heavies got involved.
Yeah.
There's awful problems with gang culture in Manchester.
Yeah, an incident happened there. Petrol was involved. The kind of threat of, give us the money, otherwise your history. And so they went, right, that's it, we're off. And they went to Ibiza. And so that was, I think, quite an important moment, really. Got speaking to a particular guy responsible for a club called Coup or Privilege. They had a Monday night available. They thought maybe we could do what we did in Manchester, but actually upscale it. Maybe this is the place for us. So that started another phase. Although you've got other clubs like La Troya, Space, all these other clubs are kind of ascending and getting bigger and bigger and more people.
Well, you both mentioned Manumission. Is that the biggest? Is that the or the...
It becomes certainly the most attention grabbing. I mean, the longest standing club in Ibiza, I think, there's a famous club, it's Pasha. It's been going since mid-70s, but they take over at Q or Privilege as it was known, and that's a massive club.
Yeah.
And very, very quickly, Manumission becomes like, it just felt when I was there like it was the talking point of Ibiza.
Yeah.
This was the sort of
it becomes, in a regular sense, the biggest nightclub in the world. It's in the Guinness Book of Records, 10,000 people.
So vast building.
Huge, massive sort of glass dome, like it looks like the Epcot Centre or something, you know what I mean?
Kind of like a golf ball on one side of it and a big massive window at the other, so in the morning the sun rises, blasts through the window as everyone's still raving. People don't really go there till 2 or 3 in the morning, and go through, carry on to the other clubs. And that's another thing that's worth mentioning, that it feels like kind of continuum. You could go out pretty much and carry on going out without going to bed for a week.
Space opens at 9 in the morning, and that goes on until mid-afternoon.
Not surprised some strange events started to happen.
Yeah.
That's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, and then from that, onto the beach. So there was always stuff
24-hour party people.
Exactly.
Until you lock yourself in your bedroom because you've had enough.
24-hour bedroom people. Knock, knock. Alexis, come on, no.
But I think by this period, by 98, it's almost like turbocharged in a way. And there are other things, aren't there, Alexis? Like there's a TV program called Ibiza Uncovered, shows different aspects of people working in Ibiza, living in Ibiza. Like Alexis said, you show things like that and it's like a magnet. People going, wow. It occurred to me the other day, you imagine mods in 1964, it's like, here's authority, here's our society. What a subculture does in that way, or a culture like that does, is it pulls open these curtains and you can jump through at a particular time, and then sometimes the curtains shut and then it changes into something else, or people change and they go, oh well, I'm not doing that anymore, I'm older now. This is what these things do, is they pull open the curtains to enable people to jump through them, and you're getting that same experience that's universal to all cultures like this. When it's being broadcast in something like Ibiza Uncovered, it is attracting a different sort of person. You're not necessarily getting the people that have been there in 1988, the kind of, you could say, pioneer people. But what you are doing is you're getting more people.
I would say the difference I've just noticed from the outside between the people who've been to Ibiza, particularly in the earlier days, and those experiences, is that they did seem fundamentally changed by it in a different sort of way. Like they seem to share it between them, and it's like never seems to leave them in some way. It's like something major changed in their consciousness in some way. In this beautiful place, on these drugs, with other people, and dancing, and that music.
It was something that you absolutely couldn't get in England. Club was outdoors. They were taking this drug for the first time. So it's an experience completely outside of your ken, you know?
So it's like a rite of passage for some young people, isn't it? So that you've got these... we're in a society where we don't have many rites of passages, right? But you're not only leaving home to go off to work or go to college, but you go away to this place, fundamentally shifted your consciousness.
Some people never come back.
Right,
some people move. You know, they go. I mean, I know one particular guy who, I'm sure he won't mind me saying who he is. He's Howard Helvis. He's known as Helvis. He's in the book, actually. He went to the airport, thought, I want to go somewhere, and met up with 2 American guys, just started chatting to them, and they're like, well, so we're going to go to Ibiza because that's the party place. And he was like, do you know what? I'm going to go there as well. And so he did. And I think he moved away from there for about 3 or 4 years, I think, and then he's returned there, and he still lives there to this day. He found something there, freed his mind, you know, the liberty of it.
Also, when you talk about a rite of passage, something else that was happening when I went out to Ibiza in the mid-90s was the clubs were employing a lot of people, sort of flyering and things like that. And there was a sort of group of people out there that I met, and it was almost like... You know that sort of phenomenon in America where you would go off and become a deadhead for a summer? You know what I mean? And follow the Grateful Dead round or whatever. It was like a sort of dance music version of that. These were kind of normal kids in their, you know, early 20s, late teens, who would go out to Ibiza and sort of earn a living, get into clubs for nothing, and that would be their kind of life.
You know, some people would just go on spec they've got an amount of money, and they would think, right, we're going to have the whole season here, whether they make it through or not, because it's, you know, if you're going out every night partying as well as flying.
You know what the amazing thing about your book? It's a wonderful tapestry of wonders. It's the amount of different types of people, and I'm just opening this page. Here's Sean Ryder and Howard Marks, right? Just Bez is in here too, but I mean, there's gimps in here, right? There's nerds.
But everyone's welcome. Just look at the age as well. You know, you've got young people to old people, you know, to retired people. Everyone's there.
You've quite a lot of sort of S&M types in there. There's, you know, but there's also a couple of serial killers.
I don't know. You know,
I don't know whether who these 2 guys are. I'll show Alexis and see what he thinks. They look like serial killers to me.
Yeah.
2 Hunter S. Thompsons.
It's the Hunter S. Thompson reunion party.
I know.
But it looks all great fun. Did you stay off the stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, because you've got a job to do, right? You're there with your camera. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not an easy place to take shots, is it? So?
No, you know, it would slow me down anyway, you know. But then I'm having to drive around as well, you know, I'm going from one place to the other. Because
of this close-ups as well, so you're actually engaging with people, right?
Yeah.
That's what comes across. It's very much, it does feel like you're in it. You know, it's not some anthropological survey of this tribe of people.
Well, it is from an insider's point of view, though. I was there sort of absolutely loving it, feeling like I'm immersed in the whole thing. I'm dancing around, you know, I'm there, I'm loving it, you know, and just walking around and speaking to people as well, of course, because you make up friendships with people, and if you're regularly going to different places, I'm very much viewing it from the inside.
Well, you both went back several times, and Alexis, in your case, were you going back as a clubber or both again? I mean, did you get infected by the bug? And
No, I didn't. The thing you're talking about, this kind of magical thing, when I was in Ibiza, it was fascinating, but every occasion I went back after that was as a writer. The initial experiences I had at raves in England, they absolutely 100% changed my life. I mean, there's no question about that. They were transformative experiences. I'm not entirely certain I would be a music journalist and I had them. By the time I got to Ibiza, no, it felt like sort of going on holiday. And there were aspects of it that I wasn't madly keen on. One of the reasons Manumission got a lot of press is that one of the promoters, a guy called Mike, who you mentioned before, and his girlfriend, now wife, used to perform a sex show. They talk about it in Dean's book, and they present it as a kind of descendant of these kind of happenings that we were talking about. I wasn't mad keen on that. I just sort of thought it was a bit sleazy and grotty, people having sex at that time of the morning.
I get that.
What they were doing is seeing, you remember Archaeos, the circus, and That would have been in the sort of 90s, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there was the emergence of these big circus experiences, weren't they? Big productions, Muso Waste.
So you got stuff going off all over the place. Going back to Manumission, I think that's what they did in a really clever sort of way. Is a lot of the workers were clubbers, you know, and so they would get those people to come along, dress and behave in particular ways, and then that would inspire the audience to do different things. And if you're talking to a big audience, you're not going to kind of give everybody an epiphany or make everyone change their mind. But if you affect a certain percentage, you're doing a good job. That's what they were doing, is they were creating sort of happenings, these strange things. Things were going off around the club all over the place all the time. So it's not inconceivable. You're there and all of a sudden above you, someone coming down as an aerial artist blowing fire out. One time, it actually, in 97, before I went there, one of the big banners caught fire, 10,000 people in a club, and they ushered everyone out. But then, more or less within an hour or whatever, everyone was back in there. So it wasn't like...
Right, so you get this shift into more of the spectacle, right? Cabaret, in a way, on a massive scale. So it's not just kids getting down with the music and the drugs and each other. It's now shifting into something else, because these things are more expensive to put on, so more expensive to get in, I'm guessing, as well. So I think it's more expensive to stay on Ibiza. This is when it starts to shift, and maybe we should talk about that, because Alexis, later you wrote this piece, Board of the Dance. This is 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now, a bit contentious then.
For which I've never been forgiven, no.
Well, you might have changed your mind on it now, but you're saying that once it was been rebellious and thrilling, but now...
I felt that the dance scene generally had become absolutely rapacious in its desire to extract money out of people, and was ultimately treating people like mugs. Like, they were so off their tits on drugs that they wouldn't notice they were being made mugs of. A variety of different things happened. You know, I just thought we were sort of wrong. I think the Ministry of Sound in London launched their own range of clothing and then said, nobody who wore that will be allowed into the club.
Wow.
Yeah, this is like for the dickheads.
For the proles, wasn't it?
And there was a number of things that happened, and I just felt it was sort of countercultural by default initially. It felt you were doing something outside of the norm, and I suppose that when something gets big, it just becomes the norm, and that's absolutely fair enough. But I felt the kind of hero worship of DJs was getting stupid. Fees they were being paid were ridiculous. It just all suddenly seemed a bit naff.
Well, you said once the counterculture movement, clubbing became obsessed with nostalgia, spectacle and profit, and it had become licensed and franchised.
Yeah, it was licensed and franchised.
And that isn't to say that people couldn't go there and have a great time. It's very different than what 10 years previously and even 10 years before that, right?
You know, you may well be enjoying yourself, and that's great, and that's really good, and I don't decry that at all. But you can't pretend that you're taking part in anything that's any kind of alternative to mainstream if what you're taking part in is sponsored by Paco Rabanne and being broadcast on Radio 1. I'm sorry, you can't. What happened in England was that it got sort of so big, it basically just toppled over, and it toppled over on Millennium Eve, where there were all these huge parties that were going on, incredibly expensive to get into, expensive to run, and people didn't go to them. People lost a lot of money, and then there was an attempt to open a massive super club in Leicester Square called Home, which just went disastrously wrong. It felt like something that needed to scale down back to a more manageable state.
Here is a sidebar, a quick waltz through British club culture. Before the beats were dropped in Ibiza, before the Hacienda, before even the Mods and the Soul Boys, Britain had spent decades dancing, sometimes in the shadows. In London Soho in the 1920s and 30s, where the streets were foggy, the morals were tight, things were lively behind closed doors. Clubs like the 43, the Shim Sham and the Nest, they weren't just dens of iniquity, they were epicentres of British underground culture. Places where you'd find flappers, queers, bohemians and jazz musicians all brushing shoulders in rooms lit by candlelight. The police didn't like it, the authorities called them vice dens, but something electric was happening inside. And then came World War II, and surprisingly, club life didn't stop even then. In fact, it got weirder in some ways. In blackout conditions, basement bars, jazz joints and shebeens, illegal drinking dens kept the music beating. American GIs brought swing records. British women, newly empowered by war work, hit the dance floor in numbers. There was danger, and the bombed-out world above only added to the desire to forget for a while. In the 50s and 60s, there was a new crowd. The Mods, sharp suits, Lambrettas and a deep love of American R&B, ska and soul. Clubs like the Flamingo and the Scene in London became hallowed ground for all-night dancing. There of style, swagger, still a bit of menace. And meanwhile, in the north, something beautiful was brewing. Northern soul at Wigan Casino, the Twisted Wheel, places where rare American 45s were played. Fast, loud, sweaty, the dancing was athletic. The culture was obsessive. At the same time, Caribbean sound systems, brought by the Windrush generation to London and Birmingham, built something else entirely. The sound system, towering speakers, homemade dub plates, yard parties and sound clashes. And that culture laid the foundations for jungle, grime, dubstep and so much more later on. Also, the DIY spirit that would power the rave scene at the beginning. And then there were the soul weekenders. Imagine it, a holiday camp taken over by British youth, dancers, fashionistas, living for the music away from the restrictions of daily life. A full weekend of dancing, styling and flirting. In the late 70s, punk rock turned clubs into places of rebellion and chaos in the mosh pit. Venues like the Roxy and the 100 Club hosted explosive gigs which gave way to post-punk and industrial nights where bands like Joy Division and Cabaret Voltaire fused live performance and proto-club energy. And in the early 80s, clubs like the Blitz gave rise to the new romantic scene, marrying fashion, synth-pop and performance. And before Ibiza's influence took hold, rare groove and electro-funk dominated underground nights, sounds that shaped the street culture.
Going to a rave, that changed my life. I felt that this experience that had been life-changing for me was just sort of becoming devalued.
It's a story which you see across the culture in terms of counterculture becoming mainstream culture. It just
they're selling hippie wigs in Woolworths.
They're selling hippie wigs in Woolworths, that's it, yeah. Counterculture becomes culture, community becomes commodity, experience becomes content. Accelerated in your terms, Dean, because everybody's got phones, of course. So it becomes about the image. Everybody's more self-conscious about how they look, right? The world is flooded with images as well. Technical brilliance is going on. The spectacle gets bigger and bigger and more sort of fantastic, but maybe the kind of personal experience is a very different sort of thing, isn't it? Where are we now in Ibiza? Do we know what it's like there now?
There was a period where it got really, you had like P. Diddy and people like that, Paris Hilton stuff turning up, didn't you?
I think
VIP lounge and all that.
What happened is felt like it was going more VIP. It was more, there were moves afoot, I think, to try and make it more premium experience or something, rather than everyone just being in there. And you are getting people, all different stratas of culture.
The rich, poor, famous, obscure, whatever it is.
Like literally everyone's together, all in the same place, all having a great time. In saying that, there still were VIP areas, but you could basically just walk through it, whereas the moves were to take it up from a sort of financial position as well. So you have to have more money to get there, and you have to then start acquiring the ability to get into the VIP or the VVIP or the VVVIP, you know what I mean? So it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger.
Sounds like the Masons. There's always an underground though, isn't there? So
100%.
Where is it? Is there still an underground on Ibiza even? I mean, are there places that still...
I think some of the heat has been taken out of Ibiza in a good way by the fact the sort of massive explosion of dance music in America, which, you know, nobody really anticipated that happening, and it became this huge thing primarily based around Las Vegas, which took on all these elements that we're talking about and kind of supersized them, made them a massive spectacle out of these, you know, huge things. And I think if you were somebody that is primarily interested in making as much money as you possibly can, you would concentrate your efforts there, because the audience is, because it's America, it's Vegas, it's bigger than you would on Ibiza.
I think also bearing in mind that the island itself is so much focused on tourism, and when COVID and that period happened, that changed a lot. The euro coming in and also Brexit, it sort of changes even the nature of people who work there. Developed a lot since that period. There's the roads are really wide, super highways, buildings have gone up, the nightclubs have got much bigger. Also focused on, you know, things like video screens and taking it into a slightly different realm. You know, you've got a DJ with big video screens behind. And
do you think the era of the superstar DJ is passing or peaked?
Not in America. I mean,
no.
You've got these huge people that are getting, you know, literally $250,000 a night to DJ. So Calvin Harris or Tiesto, people like that, they're still that still exists.
Yeah, but even like, you know, David Guetta, for example, he would be DJing there, but now he's like...
Well, so before, I think you'd concentrate your efforts there if you wanted to be start DJing. I don't see anybody, and this is not so there are not, you know, brilliant DJs operating now, there are, but I don't see anybody achieving the kind of celebrity that somebody like Fatboy Slim or Paul Oakenfold achieved. You know what I mean? In the 90s, they were kind of household names, right?
They were.
It was probably, it's a different setup, isn't it? I mean, but there's some great DJs like Tanya Vocano, and she was DJing at a club called DC10, right under the flight path. You know, a great DJ to this day, still doing stuff. You know, really into the music. You know,
Into the music. Well, for both of you then. So when did you last go clubbing, Alexis? When was your...
My clubbing days are long behind.
Come on. When did you last go?
When did I last go?
When did you last go to
Actually,
Ibiza, and when did you last go?
Well, I last went to Ibiza in about 2009, I think. I was writing a piece about Mark Ronson, and he was DJing out there. I last went clubbing in Brighton. Horsemeat Disco had a residency down there, and I really love what Horsemeat Disco play. On one level, it was sort of fine. It was a mixed gay night, and you know, in sort of gay clubbing does not really have the kind of age limit on it that straight clubbing does. So I wasn't the oldest person there, but I was definitely in the upper percentile. I would love to think that I could still do this, but you know, I really did suck a lot of juice out of this particular orange in the 90s.
Sounds hang up your pumps.
Yeah, my daughter's 18, she goes clubbing all the time, you know, so I hand it over to her.
Dean, are you the oldest swinger in town?
well, probably. Well, I went to Ibiza last year. Clubbing, I mean, here's the thing, right? I don't really separate things. It's all part of the same fabric for me. It's like cloth, you know, and it's all woven together. When I was a kid, I started to get into music, and then I realised what that could do, and the culture and everything around it, and the mod scene and what that gave us and all of that. And so still to this day, I collect records, I buy records, I listen to music, stream music all the time.
DJ?
But yeah, DJ, it's inseparable, and it's part of what I do. And I just love, in probably an evangelical sort of way, I like going, oh my God, I love this record, this music is amazing. So
You love turning people onto a tune that you've found which you love.
yeah.
Still, yeah.
I'm finding stuff all the time, old and new, across all genres. Some people are very restrictive when it comes down to things, but I think keep your mind open, embrace it.
Well, bravo. I mean, and Alexis said earlier, there's always been people saying it was better 2 years ago. It's like Soho, isn't it? Soho was always better.
Yeah.
We did an interview with Norman Ballon, you know, who ran the Coaching Horses for years, and he had no time for that at all. He said the thing is that people talk about Soho, how wonderful it used to be. What they're talking about is how wonderful they used to be because they came here when they were young,
of course,
right?
exactly.
And so that's what they're actually remembering. Is for all we know, there might be kids going to Ibiza or any other club now, right, and getting their minds blown.
Of course there are. I wouldn't for a minute suggest that it wasn't still happening. You know, it's like that thing when the NME shut, and people were going, oh, you know, the golden age of the NME was this period, or when Nick Kent was writing for it, or whatever. Actually, the golden age of the NME was whenever you were 17.
Yeah, it's the shaft of light. It's the shaft of light through which you're passing through it.
See, I reckon all you lot share something because you were there.
I think that's really true. You notice it as a journalist when you meet other music journalists that weren't part of it. You've had a really different experience, no question.
Did you write much about the actual music?
Yeah, I wrote loads about
the
music.
You did. Stuff that I read that you read about is more about the culture around it as well.
I mean, Mixmag always tried to do both. It was important not just to write about DJs or people making the records, because a lot of the time those people weren't very interesting. But there was all this other stuff that span off it. Can you drive on drugs? You can't, incidentally. But it was sort of like a 50-50 Mixmag. It was 50% about the music and 50% about the culture around it.
But there was also talking about things like testing ecstasy tablets, and actually even that's pretty controversial, putting a big Mitsubishi pill on the front cover. At the time, a lot of people were suffering from bad drugs and stuff, and so it did usher in some sort of way more care.
It's a culture that also that you can't keep up with it unless you're actually in the depths of it. I've noticed that it's very hard to keep up what's going on musically. But that sort of lifestyle I was living is just not sustainable. I was going to send myself around the twist if I carried on like that for much longer.
I suppose your experience of the music would be very different when you weren't on the drug.
That's the or when you're not in a club.
Or when you're not in a club. Right.
That's the thing. I mean, I did it for 6 years. I mean, you can't go out clubbing 5 nights a week. It just doesn't, and lead some sort of reasonable life. It doesn't work that way. Trying to keep up with what's going on in dance music, it's the sort of one of the great regrets of my life is that I don't so much because I'm not going out clubbing anymore.
Do you have a sense of what has gone on in? Is it still evolving, or is it just?
I think so. Yeah. You think about grime. Grime comes out of UK garage. UK garage comes out of, to a certain degree, drum and bass. It all kind of keeps moving forward. There are obviously loads and loads of really interesting things happening in dance music, but I can't keep up with it anymore. I get like a little flavour of it occasionally, but all I listened to was dance music for like 5 years or something.
You do it, you have that time, and you can't plug yourself in.
It retards the progress of culture, so it's good for people like me to get out of the way.
Thanks for not getting in the way too before we did this programme. I'm going to ask you both now, because we wrap up here. Well, Alexis, we started off by this, is that where is the underground? Where is the counterculture? Will we even know it?
I don't think you would, because everything has changed because of the internet, because of social media, because of streaming. The underground is probably happening somewhere online. And also underground is a difficult thing, isn't it, to in this day and age to sort of talk about. There was that period where people started going, oh, hipsters, bloody hipsters. There's always been hipsters, and hipsters were really important because they were the kind of midwives of popular culture. In London in 1965-66, you could go and see the Pink Floyd, and they were only known to like X number of turned on hipsters. Same with the Sex Pistols in the late 75, early 76. Now if something happens, everyone finds out about it straight away.
Right.
It's very difficult to keep anything hidden. Right. So I have no idea where an underground exists. Doubtless it exists somewhere.
Right, and maybe just so briefly, because it gets eaten by the mainstream, that we don't even have time to spot it. I had an interview with Jonathan Green, who's the sort of UK's lexicographer of slang. I was asking him, well, where did all these 60s words like hip and chick and dope and pad and all this stuff, where did it come from? He said, well, it came from 1920s Black America.
Right.
So it took 40 years to get to London.
Yeah.
He said now, if a new word appears in Black America, it's about 40 days.
That's incredible.
Before people will will be using it.
Yeah.
That's how much it's speeded up.
So hipsters are out of a job. You know what I mean? It's because they have no subcultural capital anymore, because everybody has subcultural capital. Where do you think the underground is, Dean?
Yeah, I think it's wherever you want it to be,
In your head, man.
Yeah, by its very nature, it's happening somewhere.
Kids are still doing illegal parties. I know that for a fact.
Pin drop parties.
There was loads of them during COVID, wasn't there?
That's right.
I mean, I'm 100% certain that it's still happening, and it's probably for the best that a 53-year-old man doesn't know where it's happening.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like it's happening somewhere, but quite rightly, it's underground. It's like
Dean's book, Back in Ibiza Photography, 1998 to 2003, is a wonderful visual treat. If you were there, you're going to love this, because it's going to take you back there, and if you missed it like I did, you can get a flavour of it, and it's a sort of nostalgic look, I think, but it's also a sort of wonderful sort of exploration of the effervescence of youth, I love it.
I just didn't want it to be a cold chronological account of. I just wanted it to be like you've been dropped onto the island and what on earth is going on here? And, with no explanation, because that is the trip. That is how it is. It's like from day to night to day, it rolls on.
You did it. So thank you very much for that, Dean, and for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thank you very much.
And Alexis, thank you for taking us through that countercultural history of this little island
off pleasure.
In the Mediterranean. And it's good to hear about your transformative experiences. Thanks very much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Alexis, thanks to Dean. Still crazy after all these years, both of them. I'll put a link to some of Alexis's articles about clubbing in Ibiza from The Guardian. Fascinating stuff to see how he's charted the way it has changed, and of course how he has changed. And also a link to Dean's amazing book, Back in Ibiza. It's a real treat. Great fun. It's difficult to sort of look at it without smiling, but I have to make a confession. As I said, I haven't been to Ibiza. I don't feel part of that community of people who did go and feel that they've been changed by it. And this is another confession, is that I actually don't like dancing. And I regard that as a personality flaw. I'm not proud of it, but I've never liked dancing, and I don't really know why. I haven't been raving, I'm not a raver, so I do feel like I missed out on this communal feeling and some of the connections that people made, which have lasted through their time. I recognise that, and it's a rather wonderful thing. What about you? Were you a clubber? Are you a clubber? Was your life transformed by a heady cocktail of music and possibly chemicals? Are you still living it somewhere? Is the beat still going on in the back of your mind, whatever you're up to these days? Let me know. Always great to hear from friends. Thanks for listening this time. Let's keep listening. You can check out all that we do at bureauoflostculture.com. Meanwhile, I'll see you further down the road, round the bend, and over the hillsides for more tales from the underground. from the counterculture.